Hello.
Oh, hello. Is Ethan there, please?
That's me. Is this Justin?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Fantastic. I was able to pick that out with your awesome English accent there. Don't get a lot of those calling into the radio these days in Florida.
Okay.
How are you doing today, man?
Just great. Just great, yeah.
Fantastic, and thanks for taking the time to call in today. Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues. Going to be here in Florida on April 13th, 15th, and 17th. Let's get into this here. Many bands these days, starting back with my earliest memory was like Metallica, maybe in 1999, did the whole album where they played with an orchestra. But a lot of people don't realize the Moody Blues, you get credit for starting that because your second album, Days of Future Past, was an entire rock album with an orchestra. You guys launched that whole idea.
Well, I wish we could take credit for it, but really it was, Days of Future Past, the album with Nights in White Satin and Tuesday Afternoon on it, was originally recorded as a demonstration album to demonstrate that stereo could be as interesting for rock and roll as it could be for classical music, because the label we were with, Deca, in the UK, was predominantly a classical label, and they had a consumer division where they sold stereograms and stuff like that. So it was meant to really demonstrate that rock and roll could be interesting in stereo. Now the timing of it was just right for us because FM radio was just starting in America, and Days of Future Past was recorded so beautifully. And actually, we didn't actually play with the orchestra. The orchestra took our themes from our songs and enhanced those. And so the orchestra plays between our songs on Days of Future Past. Where it sounds like the orchestra on, say, Nights in White Satin, it's actually an instrument called the mellotron. But Ethan, as I'm talking, I'll take credit for it, yes.
I think you should absolutely take credit for it, and bands like Metallica and everybody else that have done it should be like, you know what, Moody Blues launched this, and it's made it awesome for all of us, so. I think
so.
Yeah. You had great success, obviously, Nights in White Satin and Tuesday Afternoon. The Moody Blues have been successful their entire career, but you saw another big resurgence, and for me, being a member of Generation X, I first really heard about you guys in the 80s with In Your Wildest Dreams, and I Know You're Out There Somewhere, which those are two parts of a continuing story, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They were actually, it went right through from, I suppose, a song called The Voice, which was on Long Distance Voyager, and then really I had that idea, and I was starting to make demos at home of my songs, and which I was, the Lindrum had been invented, and I would take those demos into the studio, as I did from The Voice and Wildest Dreams, just with a Lindrum, a keyboard, and a guitar into the studio, and then work on them from there. But I think it was, that if I had to choose one decade, Ethan, really, of the greatest time for the Moodies, I think it would be the 80s. I know I was there in the 60s because I've seen the photographs and I'm in them, but I'm not... But my mind was elsewhere,
right.
Chemically, mystically, and emotionally. But the 80s was to have that, to be able to go round again when in your sort of late 30s, 40, and to have tremendous success with songs and be on TV and stuff, it was a great gift to the group when a lot of people had written us off, really, in the mid-70s. It was a wonderful time for us.
I remember, because those were sort of my teenage angsty years in the 80s when those videos were out on MTV, and I remember watching, when part 2 came out, and I was like, oh, if only somebody would love me as much as their love is in this video, and so I totally identify. I still have those songs on my phone to this day because they grab my heart and don't let go.
Well, they were written from the heart, and I don't think there was any compromise either by the band. We weren't going for hit records, and in fact, I think all of us were surprised when Wildest Dreams was chosen as the solo. We thought there'd be other things On the Other Side of Life album that would have been chosen by the record company as singles, but some guys, after Deca was sold to Deutsche Grammophon and then to Mercury Polygram, there was guys within Mercury Polygram who just heard Wildest Dreams and just knew it was a hit in the US, and they ran with it, and that really started a great time for us. And then, because of the record starting, Wildest Dreams starting to have success, suddenly video money was available to us to make videos. We were able to choose our own director, which was a great time for us in Brian Grant to direct those videos. And like I say, it was probably the best years for the Moody Blues.
And getting to make videos, obviously, was different for everybody who had been around in the 60s, 70s, and MTV was changing things in the 80s. Did you see sort of a different kind of fame in the 80s since people could see the videos and not just hear the music on the radio?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's the first time I have ever been recognized in my life. Nobody ever knew my name, but if we were on an airplane or something and people would say, "Oh, aren't you the guy from the Moody Blues video?" And that was as far as my fame got, really. But, people know the music, but not really the personalities. But yes, I think to have control over our videos just for a while, that went away again with change of record companies, and yes, so things changed. But then to go back to your original thing, at the end of the 80s, we were invited to do an orchestral concert with the Colorado Symphony and do it live on PBS. And that really inspired a whole nother sort of decade of playing with the Moody's, because we found out that just about every major town in America has a really professional quality orchestra subsidized by the town. And we had all the parts to all our, of course, Days of Future Past and other things. And so we toured for maybe 7 or 8 years, just doing tours where orchestras were. And that was a great time for us as well. It opened a whole new sort of door of dimension to what the Moody's was about. It was a lovely time.
I remember at least one of the years when you were on that tour, because most of my radio career before I moved to Florida was spent in Lubbock, Texas, which you may know as the home of Buddy Holly, because that's about all anybody else knows about Lubbock, Texas. And you guys had come through with the orchestra, and I was like, holy cow, the Moody Blues and the orchestra. Even my parents would want to go to that show, and they were not big on pop music as it were. But yeah, you guys span all the generations, really, with your sounds.
Yes, I mean, we were able to carry our own conductor, and of course we had our own parts. And we never rehearsed with we found out that it was actually better if the orchestra rehearsed all of those parts quietly by themselves during the day, and then got them exactly right. We thought that we found out early on that if we turned up early for a sound check with the orchestra would spend so much time looking at us and wondering what was going on that they wouldn't be concentrating on their parts. So we wouldn't rehearse with them during the day. They would get their parts. Each orchestra would get their parts perfectly down, and then the whole thing would come together in the evening. It was a great idea and a great time for us. Yeah.
Let's go back just a little bit when you were talking about the introduction of stereophonic sound in the late 60s and of course FM radio. If you remember, despite the chemical alterations, when you guys were in the studio, did you just sit there for hours playing with the knobs, panning left and right and bringing this over here and layering this on this side?
Well, Deca had a really a way of doing things and a set of standards for their engineers and for their cutting rooms, and everything was clean, and the engineers wore sort of brown lab coats, and it was all done very. Deca knew how to do that. Deca was a company that was run really by elderly gentlemen that were kind of behind the times but ahead of the curve somehow, and it was a while before, it was a while before we were even allowed into the control room. Certainly not for that first album. And so it was Deca quality engineers, trained people that really made Days of Future Past and In Search of the Lost Chord in that kind of classical recording style, with a like a full stereo spread of the sound, instead of just, I was always, it's terrible to say it, but I was always rather disappointed with the Beatles, who were making records only down the road at Abbey Road Studios. We were at Broadhurst Gardens in West Hampstead, and they were at Abbey Road. But their stereo was like the guitars on the left and the vocals on the right. And I always thought they didn't pay enough attention to how, stereo could be. They had a great mono sound. But, of course, us coming to the United States in 1968 with Days of Future Past and In Search of the Lost Chord and, going into radio stations that were just beginning with FM radio, it was just perfect on FM, our stuff. We were very lucky that all of the stars aligned to make things right. And I was lucky as a songwriter to have that kind of, Mike Pinder and the Mellotron kind of made my songs work when we found that kind of orchestral sound as well. And, it's my own, now, it's my own show as a songwriter now, that the show that I do now is more about the way I wrote these songs and playing them. People come to our shows, will hear them exactly as I wrote them and as I made my own original demos for them. Yes, it's really quite interesting.
Speaking of recording and mixing and engineering in the studio, with all the modern technology and computers these days, do you use a lot of the digital audio workstations to do records now, or do you still prefer to go through analog tape with that warmer sound and work more hands-on?
Well, of course, you can kind of analog it up, afterwards, because there's so many processes that can give you that warmer analog sound. But no, actually, I record a lot in Italy, and I've been with the same guy, engineer, for best part of 25 years now. And I've just found a way of working. And I usually start, as I did at home, with, the voice and those things, The Day We Meet Again and all those things, the early things. I start with the voice and a guitar or a keyboard, and that's what I start with, and then I build it around that. And that's usually the best way I do, because the most important thing is that voice in the middle. If you get that right in a recording, then the rest seems to come right around it.
Being a guitar player myself, I always like to ask musicians, specifically guitar players, about their guitars. You're most well-known for the Gibson ES-335, which you have used throughout most of your career, but you've got a wide variety of guitars, Telecasters, Squier Strats, Guild 12-strings. I just got my first Gibson Les Paul, currently my favorite guitar right now. What is? Do you have a favorite?
Well, the last few years, I've been in touch with a company called McPherson, and because I use acoustic guitars a lot on stage. Of course, my Red 335 is out with me, and it'll be on the gigs through Florida, the rest of this week and over this weekend. And but I like the McPhersons and I like the Collings guitars made in Texas, because they're tough and they handle the road very well. I mean, my nicest guitar is my Martin D28 from 1957.
Wow.
But I don't bring it on the road anymore. It's, I'm just scared. So we need tough guitars for the road. So like you say, my Telecaster, my 335 is with me, and we do songs with that. But the Collings are great road guitars, and so are the McPhersons. And I got a James Olsen as well, which I do a song called Forever Autumn that was a solo hit for me. And, I love these guitars, and me and my guitar tech, we form our own little world at a gig, and, it revolves. My world revolves around that.
You are going to be live at the Plaza Live in Orlando on April 13th, in Clearwater, the Capitol Theater, April 15th, and Ponte Vedra Concert Hall, April 17th. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to call in today. It's been an honor to talk to you, my friend.
Great pleasure. Great pleasure. Look forward to seeing everybody. Lots of love to you, and looking forward so much to the gigs.